We're gonna be like the old people, Back in my day, we
didn't have gamer guides. We had to write into the developer.
Mario went from left to right, and he could jump very high. His cousin Waluigi, he was tall. He was a tall man.
You remember Laura Croft's boobs originally?
Oh, Laura.
When your sexual awakening is to a pointy cone boobed game character.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Dustin.
And I'm Corey.
And we are the Couch Play Cousins. So today's topic, we're going to be talking about our sort of old school 30-something generation versus the current gen of
Back
games.
in my day.
Back in my day. All the while we sip on this fine Angel's Envy. From the bowels of heaven, Angel's Envy. So we're talking about today's generation games versus what we grew up with, which, I would like to classify as like the golden age of gaming.
Yes, the real age of gaming.
Exactly. Like we grew up in the era of like the original Nintendo SNES and then of course the PlayStation with Crash Bandicoot and all that shit. Croc.
Yes.
That's a reference.
Harken back. We're going to date ourselves so hard.
Yes. Oh, fuck. So, first and foremost, let's talk a little bit about, you know what? Actually, let's talk about graphics.
All right.
Because I feel like so many people today's day and age talk about graphics. Like, oh, the graphics.
So visually realistic.
You know what? Actually, and I remember when I first saw the trailer for the new Hellblade.
Yeah.
I thought to myself, wow.
Is this a game?
Yeah. And then I immediately like pulled back. I pulled out a little bit.
Yeah, I agree with you. The fact that
and then I realized, hold on, I wasn't done. And then I realized that I don't know if I want that level of graphics. Because, I feel like you start killing people in, the latest Call of Duty, you're going to have, fucking PTSD.
My therapist will be charging me for this one.
Honestly, the government, talks about, violence in video games. Think about that when, it looks like you're shooting somebody in the face in real life.
Yeah, at what point, is the realism factor too much?
Right.
I agree. At what point do video games stop feeling like video games? I don't mean to be a political statement, but I grew up with Laura Croft and her pointy triangle boobs. It's amazing.
Weren't they great? Women's boobs they don't live up to the standard that we had as children. Maybe some.
But Tomba. Games of that nature, when you could stare at it and see every single pixel. The graphics. That's what we grew up with, and boy, have things changed.
Well, you know what? I think a little. So my main. I don't want to say it's necessarily an issue because I do appreciate modern graphics.
Yeah,
I think everybody can. But, triangular, but, I think the big issue that I have is the sort of attention to graphics over everything else.
Mechanics?
Yeah, I think that's sort of the issue that we run into in today's day and age is that graphics and then storytelling, which we'll get into in a little bit, but have sort of become the center point of a lot of these new modern experiences that, they forget about some of that old school stuff that was...
At what point in these walking simulators do you look at the pretty stuff and the game's lost all of its substance? Storyline, gone. Mechanics, gone. But boy, is it pretty.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I do think that they have a little bit of story, not to disagree with you, but, I disagree with you. Okay. So let me just say this about graphics.
Yeah.
And that's how they hold up. So let's if you look back at I think the Super Nintendo, the SNES era,
okay,
and the Sega Genesis and everything.
All right.
I think that's a really good sort of standard for like the longevity or sort of the evergreen aspect of visuals that consoles had.
Original Sonic.
Yeah, well, the original Sonic, Link to the Past,
Metroid.
Earthworm Jim, like all these games, right? And it's probably the most random 3 games that we could ever just list right there. There's probably so many people like, oh my god, these guys don't.
You can't believe you didn't mention blah blah blah
right.
game.
But but I think so. Back then, that 16-bit era, if you play any of those games today, they hold up tremendously well.
Yeah.
And then I play a game like, say, like something like Horizon Zero Dawn, or I remember even playing, what the fuck? Fuck me, we're drinking. Red Dead Redemption 2.
Okay.
It's a little disappointing. It took me that long to realize what the name was.
That's a perfect example of beautiful game, kind of crappy controls.
Well, yeah, but we'll get to that.
Yeah.
Don't you worry. But from a visual span, because I just want to focus on visuals real quick. And from a visuals perspective, I remember when I played like Red Dead Redemption 2, like of course the scenery was phenomenal. I'm not going to argue that.
Getting mauled by a bear was glorious and beautiful.
Yes. Just like real life. But I remember like then they'd have like the cut scenes, the story bits, Dan there, Dan, like when they'd talk to each other and they'd show like a close up on face. And I just remember thinking, and you know what? The same thing applies for Horizon Zero Dawn. I'm not taking anything away from that game. It was a great game. But everybody, I think, unanimously can agree that when like the cutscenes were happening and it was cutting into their close up of their face, their stiff face animations, everything.
Yeah.
It's like an instant thought of like, in 5 years, this game's going to look like shit. And if you look back at that
concept,
if you look back at that 16-bit era, that's not the case. Those sort of cell shading art styles, that never really gets old. Like
it always ages well.
Yeah, like a fine wine. You know that so the new Dragon Ball Z Kakarot game that's coming out.
Oh, I've got a hard on for that so much.
I got that's a hard on. It's gonna get Clue all over. So, but that game looks fantastic. But it's cell shaded. It's old animation. This actually kind of harkens into even films today.
Yeah.
Like I remember when they announced the live action version of The Lion King. I remember I used to tell people all the time, well, that's great and all, but the problem is this only applies to the visuals of today's standards. In 5 years, you're going to look at that film and be like, that looks kind of like shit, because our advances in visual effects and 3D technology is going to be so far superior from what it is today. And the same thing applies to video games.
Yeah.
The old school animation.
These new age video games aren't going to hold up. I agree with you. They're not going to hold up. People are constantly in that effort to make everything look perfect. All these new age games are going to look terrible in the future.
And that's why, and to get a little point of fact in there about Nintendo, because I feel like I'm going to do this in everything, in every subject going forward.
Oh God, Nintendo!
People are going to think I'm such a Nintendo fanboy. But the truth is they have that sort of Disney approach of animation where they go for that old school effects, and that's why a lot of their games age very well. Like you can still play Mario 64, sort of that comfort food, video game. Compared to today, where like you can't play a lot of PlayStation 1 games comfortably anymore. But anyway, so graphics, it's not just about like the real, like I think the realism is cool and all, but it just has an aging effect to it.
Yeah, but
us,
it's not always about graphics. Let's like kind of branch into it. We experienced a lot of really good stories growing up too. Really, amazing pieces of just, I don't know what I better say it, but just Final Fantasy VII, amazing story.
You know what? Can I just interject real quick? Because you said Final Fantasy VII, and with the new one coming out and everything, which by the way was delayed.
Always.
Yeah. So it's actually interesting because I remember when I first heard that game was getting changes to the story, I thought
I was horrified.
Fucking idiots! Like the whole point of creating a new remaster or recreation was the fact that like the fan base is so hardcore that we didn't want you to change a thing or you're going to piss anyone off. I actually played the 7, the original, again when it launched on the Switch's eShop, and then I quickly realized, oh yeah, some of this stuff is kind of
kitschy. Yeah.
And it only kind of works
Sith and stuff like that.
Yeah, and it only works for that chibi style art style or graphic style. So for modern games, I don't know how well
So you think with the more serious take they're taking on it, with the adjustments to the story, it'll probably match up that is what you're thinking, or what do you think?
Well, we'll see. But I think the bigger point is like I think that when games used to be obscure, you know, like those chibi styles, those 16 bits, it kind of allowed you to imagine more and sort of build your own visual representation of what you thought things were going on. And now everything's so realistic that like it doesn't leave that room for imagination. I think that kind of maybe takes you out of the experience a little bit.
You're kind of right on that, because I used to remember, and like just harkening back to like games like Final Fantasy VII, like the scene with Sephiroth and the fire.
Yeah,
I had my own visual impersonation of this big looming guy with this massive sword.
It's massive erection.
Massive. And I had my own visual take on it.
Corey dreamed about a big guy with a massive sword.
Big swords. But it allowed you, with that little block kind of shade format, to immerse yourself with your imagination. But now everything's done for you. Yeah. There's no imagining left. You're right. Mm-hmm. It's all spoon-fed right to you. And there's no real chance to change your perspective, because it's there. It's real as day almost with how these people look nowadays.
And don't even get me started on like the inclusion of real actors in video games today. Oh. It kind of just pulls me out of the experience. I don't know about you, but it's just sort of like I invest myself into like the world of video games, especially when it comes to RPGs. Like even like Fallout New Order, like I couldn't help getting over the fact that like I was just like fucking Derek McConaughey,
like Kevin Spacey in Call of Duty.
Anyway, I'll just avoid that
didn't
topic.
Age well.
No, it did not. But yeah, I think well, one thing that graphics do and like the modern take is from a storytelling perspective. Like things are definitely a lot more in depth and cinematic than they've ever been before. But well, I mean, forget the buts. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah,
like, I do think that there's some benefits there. But again, you know, a little bit of that lack of imagination is there. But the storytelling bits now, like cutscenes today, are like straight out of film.
Yeah. There are no cutscenes. I'd argue that with graphics nowadays, the regular game's graphics bleed right into the cutscenes. Where
especially for next gen.
Yeah. And now, but if you look at the older generation, you know this is a cutscene. Mm-hmm. You know, just judging by the transition.
Oh yeah, that half second of black.
Exactly.
Like transition to
exactly.
Speaking of Final Fantasy VII, like you go from these chibi, and then it like has these like they tried to be realistic back then, and you're just like this isn't.
It was the transition was jarring. Yeah. You know, but like arguably, I think immersion factor nowadays, it's a little bit better, because you go straight literally from gameplay right into cutscene and then right back. Look at the new Uncharted games and things like that with how graphically they were.
Yeah, by the way, Uncharted 4 I think is still the best looking game in today's generation.
Yeah, the background, the panoramics were like postcards. They look like postcards. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think there's a perfect example of your cutscene meshing literally with your gameplay. Yeah. So immersion factor, you transition back and forth right back into the scene with, you know, minimal jarring factor, which I think is a boon to kind of newer age graphics.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it does assist in storytelling, because you don't have that jarring factor, you don't have that transitional pain.
But you know what? I do think that like storytelling, because, you know, and I feel like we've referenced Final Fantasy VII enough, so let's just keep referencing it. Mm-hmm. A game like Final Fantasy VII, like as silly as it was, and as much as like even if you look back at it today, and it maybe it's like some of that storytelling doesn't hold up by today's standards, but at the same time, like I feel like because they lacked. Well, not necessarily lack, because of course it was up to current gen specs back when it released, but they were able to incorporate so much. I feel like, and that's like one of the big problems when it comes to graphics to today's generation is this demand that we have 4K, and then we're going to have demand for 8K and everything growing up or going
120
forward.
frames per second.
Yeah, but it's like all of those aspects are going to take so much time to develop that you're talking about more delays, but you're talking about less time that can be spent in the actual storytelling of the game, the actual gameplay experience.
No, I agree. The newest generations have been that, race to the top for graphics, and I think a lot of the storylines and things like that have been left in the dust. They just kept relying completely on, oh, look how beautiful this is. Yeah. Fuck the storyline. We'll get immersed regardless.
Right.
And that's just, it's not the truth. I played plenty of games that were beautiful, but I just kept myself at the end of the game going, well, that sucked.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much truth in that.
Oh, yeah. I think like movies today follow a lot of that too.
Oh, yeah.
But, okay, so to kind of push the conversation forward a little bit ago, because I'm sure we could spend forever talking about graphics alone, or storytelling
Air guitar.
But beyond talking about just like the gameplay aspects, one thing that I've noticed a lot with today's generation of stuff is the difficulty. Games used to be so difficult.
Yes.
But like it was amazing because like it used to be that you would actually have to talk to friends and like who maybe subscribe to like magazines to give you the answer. And like remember the original like Metal Gear Solid?
Oh my god.
You had to switch ports when you fought what was his name? The
Psycho Mantis.
Psycho Mantis.
Psycho Mantis.
When you fight Psycho Mantis, you had to switch your controller port. And then, like, in Mega Man, which, by the way, one of my all-time favorite franchises and one of my mains in Super Smash Brothers, is that I remember when you fought the Fire Guy, Fireman, which they were real inventive with their names. So when you fought
Leaf Man,
when you fought Fireman, I remember you had to cheat to beat that asshole. You had to pause the game when he shot his little fucking jizz at you, and then you like basically became invincible for a few seconds so you could like blink
flash right through the wave. Yeah.
And that was like the only way you could beat that guy. But like, so that was an extreme. But games used to be such a challenge back then. And nowadays, like any game I play, like even some of the more difficult ones, like I remember like, so like Dark Souls.
Yeah.
Everyone talks about Dark Souls in relation to its difficulty. And I remember I only played Dark Souls like maybe like 4 or 5 years ago at this point. And I remember when I played it, I thought to myself, like, it is more challenging than your average game. But I'm
going to catch flack for saying this. But Dark Souls, if you have any rhythm at all and you learn how to roll the game mechanics, it's not that hard.
Get them, boys!
No, I'm being honest. It's true. It's true.
Well, no, I agree. And I don't think it's nearly as difficult as it's broadcast to be. It is more challenging in perspective to other games, but that therein lies
that's the issue.
The issue. Now I do think that there's like so like again, here I go with Nintendo references. But like Mario Odyssey, right? One of the better games of the decade, in my opinion. The game was super, super easy. Like, sure, there's an occasional moon that's hard to get to, but the game itself is very easy. However, the fun factor is so good that the difficulty is sort of irrelevant. And I feel like there's not enough games that sort of support that foundation. Like, there's like too many games are just sort of like easy. Like, I actually just recently finally got around to Darksiders, as I mentioned in the last episode. And it's a little challenging, but it's not super challenging. But it's a little more difficult. And I find that, like, if it wasn't that difficult, I don't know that the game would be nearly as fun as it is.
I feel like most games now just rely on, for difficulty, just, I want to say like Dark Souls-esque dodge roll mechanics.
Yeah.
But it really feels like that. It's like, it's almost die, repeat, memorize pattern, beat boss.
Right.
And if that's the apex of difficulty in this generation.
All right.
All you have to do is die enough and you can beat a boss.
Which, well, okay, so I think that that's okay to a certain degree. Like, I think that, like, dying in difficulty is a thing that counts. But I just don't feel like even, like, some of the more difficult games by today's standards, like, they just don't challenge me enough. Like, the puzzles aren't as complex or whatever it is. Which is one of the reasons why GTFO is really exciting me, because it's
that game looks really interesting, actually. Yeah. It's one of those games where the difficulty isn't based in just your sole skill, but it's more based on how well you can communicate with others, which is actually a rare kind of concept when it comes to difficulty.
Yeah.
Not many games make you rely too much on the skill of others.
Yeah.
But it's a very slow drag game, but it looks like an immense everything you do is synchronized.
What was it? I think it was the Crash Insane trilogy. Remember when that launched? There was like this whole social media buzz about, is Crash too difficult? It's like, no, like that's like, it's like as it was back then. And that game was actually relatively easy.
Yeah.
But we do have to move on. But basically I think ultimately the discussion there is that the difficulty today is just like, it's just nothing compared to what games used to be.
I agree entirely.
And that's one thing that I hope to see improve in the future. Is I hope that games sort of we do start to see like basically like a full cycle of like coming back to that challenge that games used to have.
A sense of pride and accomplishment.
Yeah, like even we referenced it in our PC gaming episode, but oh my goodness.
PlanetSide?
PlanetSide. When we first referenced PlanetSide in the last one, so this is what happens when you drink. You can't think clearly. It was so hard to get a kill in that game, but when you did,
just getting one kill in this battle of 300 people,
fantastic,
felt really validating.
You felt like a god.
Yeah, you're like, oh, I did something finally.
So yeah, I think that's the thing. I'd like to see sort of like difficulty return a little bit, and but you know another thing that we see a lot today's day and age is day one patches, right? And then of course, coupled with that, you have like general updates to games, and then DLC.
It's never a full game.
It's not like half the time you get a game nowadays. It's like here, like they're trying to meet a deadline, and now that they know that they can update the game, it's sort of like just release it anyway because we can update.
How many games have been released broken?
Oh, too many.
It's just ridiculous that they meet an arbitrary deadline by a publisher. They release something that's broken for $60, and it requires day one, day two patches to make the game even function.
And what pisses me off is that people eventually support that. Like they'll be like, "Oh, this game's fucked."
Yeah, how the hell does this become the new norm?
They get a patch, and then everyone's like, "Well, since they patched it, they actually patched a lot of the frame rate issues." It's like, fuck you! Like that game should be good from the get-go, and that's what games used to be back when we released. Like, of course, I'm not saying that games that came out back in our day were flawless, but like at least they were relatively full-on complete.
They had to release a finished product.
Right, they couldn't rely on that.
Because if they didn't, their company would tank.
Right.
They didn't have the luxury of patching.
And it's sort of like it's funny because it's sort of like even DLC, right? Like downloadable content.
Yeah.
It's like it's cool in one perspective, right? Like you don't have to wait a full year for a sequel. You can get some downloadable content instead of marginal upgrades and shit. But at the same time, I mean, like DLC's fine, but when it comes to cut content DLC, that's bullshit.
It's a double-edged thing. Yes, you do get a little bit of that extra whipped cream topping on your delicious cupcake of a game, but at what cost? They're now selling storylines that are fractured in half, in quarters, just to wring out every last freaking drop of money out of you.
Oh, yeah.
That's bullshit.
Oh, it's disgusting. And I can't tell you how many times like people buy into that. Like EA.
Yeah.
How many times do people
games.
EA suck my dick? How many times does EA fuck you over, and everyone still buys their games. Like I can't, like they still make billions of dollars on DLC or like on purchases. Like
don't even get me
purchases.
started about FIFA and all that stuff. Like, guys, like how do you guys tolerate that level of sodomy? I'm sorry, it's so true. It's like lotion in hand, please.
Yeah.
How can you take that much from a developer?
Right.
Before enough is enough. But anyways, I don't want to go down that path.
Oh no, it's fine. I mean, we'll move on anyway. But the whole aspect of like what games can get away with today because of day one patches and everything. It's just it's unfair to the consumer. And I think that's like I'm not against DLC and all these and patches and stuff because there are benefits like problems that existed can now be fixed and that wasn't something in the past.
Hot fixes,
but they just take advantage of the consumer, and I think that's the big issue.
And my thing I'm most afraid of is that it's become the norm. Mm-hmm. People can release games that are broken, and that's the norm, and people will tolerate games that just need to have patches fixed, and I don't want that to happen.
Yeah. So another thing to bring up about the current gen versus what we would is the impact that like social media and like a lot of the marketing today's day and age has an effect on today. Like I remember when I was a youngin', so obviously, like a game that I really love is like Ocarina of Time, right?
Yeah.
Like I think it's no joke, but like back then it used to, or even Final Fantasy VII, because I brought those games up in the past. But like it used to be that you would have to rely on like magazines and strategy guides, and
Game
Informer,
yeah, with a demo disc,
yeah. But like in the demo discs,
remember those things?
Oh man, like $5. You remember the old $5 PlayStation demo discs?
Yeah.
And, like, you know what? Like I feel like there's not enough demo. Oh my gosh, I could go down a million avenues on today, but like the old school demo discs, like that shit was legit.
Oh man,
it was like $5. You'd get like I don't even remember, like 10 games plus.
Yeah, I remember one that had Zone of Enders in it, and
I remember the original one that had like lore that had Tomb Raider, the original the original Rayman 3D and everything like that. Like it was just like what a brilliant way to like. I don't know, and like nowadays, what do people rely on? They go to YouTube. And that's what they do. And I feel like there's so much ruined by today's marketing standpoints. Like so many people, because one thing I say, like we talked about this in our Game of the Year decade and stuff, is Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, right? Like that's my game of the decade and everything. Yeah. But the reason that I like that game so much was because I went into that game basically blind. I watched nothing on it. But like I think that's the difference. If you watched a lot of shit on that game before you played it, you would think that game's like fucking average.
Yeah.
And I didn't know anything about it. So every little thing that happened in that game was like brand new to me.
I think this is the only point I'm going to have on this is you hit the nail on the head. Hype driven gaming. Yeah. I freaking hate it. I've been burned so bad by hype over and over again. Yeah. And at the point where if a game has any hype to it, I probably won't play it for maybe at least 2 months.
Just to wait for those
reviews.
Just
to wait for the reviews. It's just hype-driven gaming. Don't do it, man. It's just not worth it.
Well, and that's a lot to it too, because you get so much of this media coverage that like your expectations are way higher than they should be.
Yeah.
And maybe if it wasn't for those like Let's Plays and everything else that exists nowadays, like maybe your expectations wouldn't be so high, and maybe you would be able to actually enjoy that game.
I've got to the point where I'm more suspicious than anything. If a game has so much hype it needs to sell, something seems fishy with me. Why does it need that much to actually do well? I don't know. I don't trust it.
So yeah, I think that this day and age, with like the amount of exposure that we have to, like pretty much everything, it's kind of it's unfortunate. I think there's pros and cons, but I do think more so than not, like people are just sort of ruining their experience. But yeah, I do think that like I mean, in one sense, like sure, if you can't afford something, you want to watch a Let's Play, but in the other sense, like you can't really fully enjoy a game experience. But that actually kind of brings me to another point that I want to make, is like the nostalgia factor, right? Like the old school days, I think like back in the day we didn't have all that social media. And there weren't as many games that released back then as there are today. So everybody was sort of playing the same game.
Yeah.
And I remember actually talking to another cousin of mine, right? Because you're not my only cousin. And
Blasphemy!
You're actually not even my favorite. Fuck you. I hate you. No, but I was talking to another cousin of mine about exactly that, the nostalgia factor and how it plays into today's day and age. Like, I honestly wondered, like, are kids even going to have that going forward? Because of the amount of content that's released, and the amount of exposure it has in the social media airspace. Like, can people even really get attached to games in the same way that we did?
I don't even think younger gamers realize right now, but they are riding our nostalgia wave.
Yeah.
Resident Evil 2.
Yeah.
Resident Evil 3. All these other games coming out there.
Crash
Bandicoot.
CTR.
All these games that they're experiencing right now, they're experiencing because they're riding a nostalgia wave that their marketing is going towards us.
Yeah.
So you're welcome. But yeah, it's nostalgia is powerful, but I do question what nostalgia will they have on games that don't age very well.
Yeah, I just think to myself, like, in 5 years, are people going to be talking about Modern Warfare 2 or whatever it is? Like, are people ever going to really think about those? Because there's so much that's out there now. But back in the day, everyone was playing Final Fantasy VII. Everyone was playing Super Mario Land on the original Game Boy. Everyone played all of those games. And that was sort of like, it was a conversation piece. The original Pokemon Red and Blue, for example. Like, everyone played it. So, like, that's all you talked about. And you spent months and sometimes years on these games before the next big release came out. And, like, nowadays, it's, like music, movies, anything. It's just, it doesn't have the same level of effect. So I wonder if the current generation will be able to experience the same level of nostalgia that we do.
I don't think so. I'm just being honest. I don't think many of the newer age games that were prolific in this last generation.
I mean, even cartoons.
Yeah.
Right? Like, are people going to be talking about like the fucking what's that, like, dog cartoon that's out
Cat
now?
Dog.
No. Well, that's what we had. Cat Dog.
Cat Dog.
One eats a hot dog, the other throws up a hot dog. I don't know. But like we had, like, Angry Beavers. We had,
Ed and Eddie.
Yes, Ed and Eddie. That was fantastic. Rocko's Modern Life, my favorite. We had, so much shit. But, like, today, like, are people going to remember, like, the cartoons that are available today or anything like that?
Like, is Gravity Falls going to have a nostalgic re-release? I don't know.
No, I don't even know what that is. So.
Yeah, well,
I'm old. But yeah, and that's just, it's like, I almost feel bad for current gamers, because they just, I feel like they don't have that sort of level of surprise. I talked about this, and I'll keep this to like 20 seconds, I promise. But, like, I remember, like, Ocarina of Time, like I said before, is one of my favorite games of all time. Okay, so I remember learning nothing about the game. I didn't even know about its existence, and I remember I had, chore money. I got from, like, vacuuming the house when I was a kid. And I went into the GameStop store, which is, like, once a month I was able to do that with all the chore money that I saved up. And I remember seeing that game on the shelf. It was just a gold box with, like, the word Zelda on it. I had no idea what it was. And I just picked it off the shelf and I flipped it over and I saw the visuals on the background. I was like, holy Jesus God, this is amazing. And, like, but, like, today, about shit like 6 months ahead of time before it comes out. And it's just like that level of, like, mystery that you were able to get back then. It's just not something that you really get today. And unless you you have to actively stay off the internet to experience that. And I feel bad that people can't experience that same level.
And I think that my final point, piggybacking off that, is, like you said, there are no surprises anymore. Even with movies and things like that, trailers will give the entire story away because for some weird reason, people don't want to have surprises. I don't understand it. We're driven in hype-driven culture that everyone wants to know everything. Yeah. And I kind of am sad over that. Yeah. But what can you do? This is the new world.
Well, actually, one last thing. This kind of is going to advance. Like, what do you think that this is going to impact in the next generation, the future generation, right? Because people are clamoring for even higher resolutions, 8K and stuff. People want higher fidelity graphics, but like how much longer is it going to take to produce games, and how much are they going to have to sacrifice from a gameplay perspective? And that's actually something I feel like we kind of danced over a little bit, but like the gameplay and mechanics of the old school days are like just everything's so fucking sticky and weird now, as like opposed to like the simplicity and everything
The effort
that
to make
arcade style.
realism in game controls.
It's just fucking. It ends up being unrealistic.
Yeah.
But anyway, and I'll just say like I'm concerned that next generation is going to get even more fucked up, because they're going to be even more concerned about resolution and graphics. That they're going to move even further away from the actual gameplay mechanic. It sucks, but that's the way that it is now, and it's what we are going forward. So, and as a great transition to that, we are planning to launch our Twitch stream where you can watch us play games instead of experiencing them yourself, which is, bittersweet. We're excited to get it going, but at the same time, we're disappointed that, that's a thing for today's generation. We're conflicted. You can follow us on Twitter at couch_cousins. If you do have any questions for us, or if you'd like to submit something that you would like us to talk about, you can get a hold of us at couchplaycousins@gmail.com.
Send news!
Oh, God, yeah, I don't want to go that back.
Oh, that's such a terrible...
Other than that, please share us with your friends. If you would like to lose those friends, you can recommend us.
Just destroy any, friendship you might have with somebody. Just send them our way, and we'll make sure you never talk to them again.
Cheers.
Cheers.